track down problems with engines, we can actually do the testing, find our evidence, and that'll lead us to the problem. But once in a while, there is no explanation why this happened. That's the case in this. Let me explain. We're working on a 99 Ford Ranger with a 4.0 engine. It originally came into our shop with a bad head gasket. It was just pumping coolant out the tailpipe, pretty bad. The vehicle owner decided that he actually didn't want to fix this truck, so he actually donated it to our school so we could let the students work on it. So knowing that it had a bad head gasket, we put some students on it and they pulled the heads, actually had to replace one head and replace the head gaskets, put it all back together, and it started and seemed like it ran fine. There was no more coolant coming out the tailpipe. They got it running, and right away it started developing some problems, so they moved it over to our department, Diagnostics. Here's what we found. There's the vehicle. Now it's a little hard to hear in the video, but the engine's running fine and idle. We're in park, and I can accelerate. It accelerates normally. But when I put it in gear, put my foot on the brake, and try to accelerate, you can hear it just falls flat. It won't hardly run when I accelerate. If I go back to neutral, back to park, accelerates fine. But when I go into put it in gear, accelerate, it just won't go. Now we did a lot of work on this vehicle, and if I actually took the time to show you each step, it'd be too long a video. So I'm just going to briefly bring you up to speed. So what can cause this engine just to fall on its face and have no power? Now keep in mind, it was brought in because the head gasket was bad and it was just pumping antifreeze through the engine. So we're suspecting possibly the catalytic converter could be bad. So in testing that, the first thing we wanted to do is scan it for codes. When we scanned it for codes, we had about 12 different codes and they were all sorts. But we kind of denied that that was the problem because of the work that was done on this with students working on it, testing and plugging, unplugging and all that. So we actually cleared the codes, but this is a Ford. Now a Ford is not going to run and bring codes right back until different procedures have been performed. Relearns have been performed. Some codes are 1 trip, 2 trip, different things like that. So we really couldn't rely on our code information to give us exact information. Yeah, they're codes, but we couldn't rely on them. So now we're going to use our instruments to test it. So when we hooked up the scanner, the first thing we looked at was the data, and we looked at fuel trim and oxygen sensors. We wanted to see what the fuel trim was doing, because that's what tells us what the computer is doing, and whether or not the oxygen sensors were responding. The oxygen sensors weren't responding at all. There's two before the catalytic converter and 1 after, and they were all bad. Now, the coolant going through here probably took out the oxygen sensors, so we replaced the oxygen sensors, all 3 of them. Now when we look at the scanner, the oxygen sensors are responding normally. They're switching above and below 1/2 volt normally. Now we start the engine, we're in idle, the oxygen sensors are switching, and the fuel trim is switching normally. So we've ruled out the oxygen sensors actually of being bad, causing the problem, but when we put it in gear, it still bogs down, it just falls on its face. Well, if the coolant knocked out the oxygen sensors, maybe it knocked out the catalytic converter. So we actually used the lab scope looking at the oxygen sensors, the one before and after the catalytic converter, looking at their pattern, and they look fine. So now we got to test the catalytic converter. Looking at the oxygen sensor response is only one way to look at a catalytic converter. It didn't look bad there, but we want to test it. So we actually used a back pressure gauge. This is where you take out an oxygen sensor, screw this in, and look at your back pressure. But our back pressure gauge indicated that there was not excessive back pressure, either at idle or even when the engine was bogging down. We put it in gear and it just falls on its face and won't accelerate. The back pressure was not excessive. It only stayed about 1 pound. So the catalytic converter is not plugged up. Now over the years, anybody that's worked on vehicles for a long time, can kind of get the sense of a feeling is their suspicion. Well, to us, it really felt like it was a timing issue. Somehow the timing's off. It's not being advanced. It's just falling on its face. Now, this engine, they pulled the heads to change the head gasket. They didn't have to affect the timing chain, but they did have to pull out the cam synchronizer. Now, if you read in your operator's manual, the timing on this engine is non-adjustable. It's all controlled by the computer, and it's controlled by the sensors, which is the cam synchronizer. Now, this engine, the cam synchronizer, is mounted back here behind the head against the firewall. It's very difficult to get to. But here's what it looks like. Now, I'm taking some shortcuts here to speed up this video, but we wanted to look at the cam signal. Now, from here, we need to go to our service manual and see where our pins are. We noticed on here, it's pin number 85. When we go to our chart, 85 is the camshaft position sensor input. So we're actually going to back probe 85 and look at our cam signal. Now, our cam sensor waveform looked fine. It was working good. But our suspicion was not that the sensor was bad, because it does start and it runs fine at idle. It's just it won't accelerate. We were thinking it's a timing issue. They've stabbed this and got it a tooth or two off. Now, you know, with a distributor, you used to be able to stab it, and if you weren't off too far, you could just rotate the distributor and maybe fine-tune it. You can't do that with the cam synchronizer. It has to be right on. So it was a different group of students who actually stabbed this, and we're not sure if they got it right. So we've got to pull it out and make sure that it's right. So when we pulled the cam synchronizer out, if you look at it real close, you can see some movement in it. Now, first off, that movement is not good. It could very easily distort the signal. And these things have a problem with that and squealing when that bearing in there goes bad. By comparison, here's a new one. And you can see when I move this one, there's no movement at all. I can't make it move at all, but it does rotate. So we got two things. One, we need to replace the cam synchronizer because it's bad. Now keep in mind, that's not the position sensor. The position sensor is up here on top, and it's going to tell us the position as it rotates. But if you look real close, you know, now as I take this, you can see it moving. That's because of the play in the shaft. So we need a new cam synchronizer anyway. Now, we pulled the synchronizer out because we weren't sure if it was stabbed right. We found out that it was bad, the shaft was bad. So we've now installed correctly a new cam sensor, and we know that it is right on mark. So let's start the engine and see what happens. So we've got the new cam synchronizer installed correctly. It started, it's idling in park. When we accelerates just like before. Now when I load the engine, it still bogs down. So our cam synchronizer wasn't the issue. The cam synchronizer was bad, the shaft was worn. We were suspecting that it was not stabbed correctly. That's not the issue, because now we know that it is stabbed correctly. It must be something else. Okay, so we're going to hook up the scanner and look at some of this data. Now this always displays everything, which actually means it goes slower. So I want to customize this, and I only want to pick the things I want to see. So I'm going to deselect everything. Now what I want to know here is oxygen sensor, bank 1, sensor 2. No, I want oxygen sensor, bank 1, sensor 1, oxygen sensor, bank 2, sensor 1. I want short-term fuel trim on both banks. And let's go down to loop status. Okay, now I've set this up in graph view, so we're actually going to display. We've got oxygen sensor, bank 1, sensor 1, oxygen sensor, bank 2, sensor 2, short term on bank 1, short term on bank 2, and our loop status. Now I'm going to start the vehicle. Now the vehicle's not warmed up yet. It's going to take a little while for the oxygen sensors to actually warm up and start switching. While it's doing that, let's move over to the driver's seat. Okay, now looking at the scanner, they're beginning to warm up, and you can see that the oxygen sensors are beginning to switch. I'm going to help it warm up a little bit by increasing the RPM. This look right here, they start switching. And they're over the loop. Now it's going to close the loop. The oxygen sensors are switching to short-term fuel curve, and it does it. That's the warm-up period has started. It's still warmed up a little bit, and now they're starting to switch. Now, we're in park, and we can accelerate. Now, I want you to watch the scope when I put it in gear. I put it in gear and there's very little change until I go to accelerate. When I go to accelerate, the oxygen sensors go max lean, short term goes max lean, and the loop status went open. Notice this all happened at the same time. Now I let off the accelerator, and I go back to idle. I go back into closed loop. Give it a little bit of time. We were pumping a lot of stuff through there, and the oxygen sensors should start switching. Put it back in the cart. The oxygen sensor starts switching. Fuel trim starts working again, and we're back in the closed loop. When I engage the engine and load the engine, I'm doing the open loop, short term, and oxygen sensors all take lean. Actually, the short term doesn't take lean, it's fixed at 0. So the oxygen sensors are reading max lean. Now what I want to point out in here, what you're seeing is going into limp-in mode. When the computer goes from closed loop to open loop, that means it's taking the computer out of fuel control. That's why our short term went to 0, because there's no more computer control. And our oxygen sensors, they're still reading and reporting, but they're reporting maximum lean. So watch that again. This is how to recognize, one way to recognize that you're in limp-in mode. So when I load the engine, we're in closed loop right now. We switch and we go to open loop. We take the computer out of the picture, so there's no more short-term fuel adjustment. It just zeroes out. We let off, we take the load off of the engine, and we go back into closed loop. We load the engine. Go to open loop. Now I'm wondering, why is this happening? Why are we going into limp-in mode? Well, we're loading the engine. What loads the engine? The transmission. The weight of the vehicle and the transmission trying to pull it adds load to the engine. When I'm in park and I accelerate, I'm really not adding much load to the engine. But when I go into park or drive, I add a lot of load, especially setting still. So this is one way to recognize that you're in limp-in mode. The computer got taken out for some reason. Why is that? You know, one of the nice things about doing diagnostics these days on cars is the information that's available to us. And there's some great information services out there. Now, anytime that I kind of run into a problem that I'm beginning to scratch my head on, this isn't making sense, what's going on, I look for some help. Identifix is a great source for that. So I went to Identifix, typed in the codes that I wanted, the keywords that I wanted, and it came up with this. So I found almost an exact match in Identifix. Basically says the engine starts and idles okay, but it has no power when the transmission is put into gear. And it lists possible codes. Now if you look at all those codes, remember we had a lot of codes when this first came in. We discounted that because so much work had been done on it, things plugged in and unplugged and everything. Anyway, the test and the fix, or the problem, is a blown or missing fuse number 13 causing no voltage to the transmission. It's causing the PCM to go into limited power mode or limp-in mode. So looking at our diagram, fuse 13 is right there. Let's go look. So we go to our fuse box. Fuse number 13 is missing. As you can see, there's prongs down there. There's supposed to be a fuse. Okay. So we're going to put a fuse in here and retry everything. Okay, we're back to our scope. Now this is old data. I'm going to start it again. Because you know the scope's going to record everything. That is old data. Now we're coming into the new data on this side. So I'm in park. I'm going to let the O2s warm up again a little bit. The oxygen sensor's warmed up and they start switching. That's a signal to go into closed loop. Fuel trim is working. Now as you recall before, when I would go into drive and load the engine, we'd go to open loop and our signals would change. Let's try that. Put it in drive, load the engine. So we're accelerating fine, our oxygen sensor stays switching, fuel trim stays being controlled, and the computer stays in closed loop, so it is no longer in limp-in mode. Now limp-in mode is one of those things that you can go into for various reasons. This is one way to see if you're in limp-in mode, to see if the computer comes out of closed loop and the short term stops doing anything because the computer is no longer controlling it. Now that's not the only way, but in this case this was the way we used to determine that we're in limp-in mode. The computer was taken out of the picture. So you might be saying, why does it still run? Because you know, in open loop the computer is not using live data to control anymore. It's going to control the car off pre-programmed instructions that are built into an open loop strategy. Now you know I often stress find the evidence and let the evidence lead you to the problem. Well, our evidence led us to the fact that fuse 13 is missing, and that's our problem. Now I have no idea why fuse 13 is missing. This came into our school Lots of different students have been working on it, doing different things. Fuse number 13 should have been there. It's not. That's our problem. Now, remember earlier in the video I said sometimes it just doesn't make sense? Well, the problem makes sense, but why fuse 13 is not there makes no sense. Now go back to your Identifix article though, because it said either blown or missing fuse 13. So if this fuse 13 is actually blown, then it actually, but there, then you could actually have these same symptoms.